Hi, welcome to this public meeting of the governing body of NHS Tees Valley Clinical Commissioning Group. As I've just noted, the meeting is going to be video recorded and will be available publicly subsequently. Now, we've got one member of the public attending, as I understand it, at the moment, and those who can't join us now will be able to view the meeting at the later date when we've actually put it up online. And we're holding this meeting via Zoom because of the current COVID restrictions. So for the smooth running of the meeting, if everybody could keep their microphones on mute, which I see just about everybody has done, and then wave your hand and indicate to myself. Oh, and Jackie also is going to be looking out for people who are wanting to speak to help me identify those wanting to contribute to the meeting.
Okay, 3 bedrooms.
Everybody on mute. Hassan.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
625.
Thanks.
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yep, can hear you. Right, okay. So if you have got other business and need to leave the room or answer a door or whatever, if you could put your microphones on mute and blank your video if possible as well, that would be useful. If you can, please use a CCG background. Unfortunately, I can't for technical reasons on my PC, so also try the blurring of the background if you can't do that. And also, if you've got any technical issues, then if I've got technical issues, then Caroline Hitchen's going to be the sort of backup vice chair of the meeting. Right, and the public member, if you're able to ask questions, it'll be towards the end of the meeting if necessary, if it's in relation to matters directly raised. Have we had any questions notified, Jane, at all?
No, we've had no questions received from members of the public.
Okay, so if we receive pre-notified questions, we deal with them during the meeting as it goes on. Okay. So now I'm going to need, because we've got a public member in attendance, I'll need to go around everybody and ask them to identify themselves. And I'll need to do that in the order that I've got on my screen. So Jane first.
My name's Jane Smales. I'm the corporate support for this governing body meeting.
Okay. Spring P49.
Hello, it's me, Penny Spring. I'm the new Director of Public Health for Darlington.
All right, welcome. Mark Adams.
Hello, it's Mark Adams. I'm the old Director of Public Health for Middlesbrough and Recruitment Cleveland.
James Nevison.
Hi, I'm a GP in Darlington and non-executive GP on the governing body.
Karen Hawkins.
Hi, I'm Karen Hawkins. I'm the Director of Commissioning responsible for primary care.
Okay, Karen Dales.
I am Karen Dales. I'm lay member and Audit Committee Chair.
David Gallagher.
I am Dave Gallagher. I'm the Accountable Officer for the CCG.
Jackie Keane.
Hello, I'm Jackie Keane, Head of Governance for the CCG.
Craig Blair.
Hi, Craig Blair, Director of Commissioning at the CCG.
David Emerton.
Hello, I'm David Emerson, the Secondary Care Doctor on the CCG governing body.
Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy Mackay. I'm the independent member for the CCG.
Okay, Mark P.
I'm Mark Pickering, Chief Finance Officer for the CCG.
Oh, yeah, Mark, you've got your usual microphone issue. Okay, Caroline Gisham.
Hello, I'm Caroline Gitcham. I'm a lay member on the governing body and I chair the primary care committee.
Okay, Michelle Thompson.
Hi, I'm the CCG lay member for patient and public involvement.
Okay, Hassan Tahir.
I'm Hassan Tahir. I'm a GP on the non-executive governing body.
Janet Walker.
Hi, I'm a GP and I'm medical director of the CCG.
Jake Graham.
Hi, I'm the Communications and Engagement Officer for Tees Valley CCG.
Hi. Jean Golightly.
Hi, Pos. I'm Jean Golightly, Director of Nurse and Quality for the CCG. Currently invisible, so now you've done introductions, I will log out and try and log back in, Chair.
Okay.
If I can come up on the screen. Thank you.
Yep. Jessica Holmesworth.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jessica Hollingsworth. I'm a GP in Middlesbrough and I'm a non-executive member of the CCG.
Yeah, Jake, I've just had a reorganization of all the squares on my screen because Jean's logged out, and then Carolyn's iPad. Okay. Carolyn's iPad presumably is the public member, Jane. Yeah. Okay. Right. Hi. So thank you for all introducing yourselves. Now, just double checking, it looks to me like the meeting's quorate. Jackie, is that right? Yes, nods from Jackie. Okay. So I've got apologies presently from Michael Horton and from Alex Sinclair as she may be able to make it later. Okay. So moving on, notification of any other business. Have we got any extra late, any other business that we haven't been notified on? No, not according to Dave. Okay, right. Declarations of interest. There's a large declaration of interest that comes with the papers. Has anybody got any other declarations of interest to add to at this moment on any of the matters under discussion? No. Okay. Right, so we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. So if you just bear with me a second as I scroll past the declaration of interest in the papers. Bear with me. Right, okay, so in your pack, page 6. Sorry, my scrolling thing's not working. Right, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and page 26. So everybody happy with those as a true and accurate record of our previous meeting? Yep, nods all round.
Sorry, pause. Could
Yep.
I just go back to 51.10? I can't remember
Right,
which page it was on now.
Yeah, just 1 second. 51.10 is on page 15.
It's just a slight adjustment because it says, I think it's about the 3rd or 4th sentence down, and it says CCG's Health Watch organisation.
Oh, yes.
I think that should just read via local Health Watch organisation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Well spotted. I hadn't spotted that one. Apologies. Right. And Jean's rejoined us, but she's having video problems. So, okay. With that small adjustment, everybody else okay with all the rest of the papers? Yep. Okay, right. Just have you scroll back down again. Okay, so we signed that off as a true and accurate record. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay, so matters arising in action log. Okay, workforce race equality standard summary. Got any update on that at all? Because that's still open.
I'm just still scrolling.
Yeah, it takes a while to move down.
I've got updates on, yeah. Yes, Julie Bailey's confirmed that these are on the website and they are connected to each other, so that action's complete.
That's lovely. Okay, and the next one, the local authority in Tees Valley have been progressing with any work to improve their levels of diversity.
Yeah, now Jake Graham is with us and he's in the meeting today. That's one of the pieces of work that he's taken forward, so that's underway.
Excellent. So we can close that off as well. Yep. NHS people plan discussion outside the meeting.
Yeah.
Diversity champion. Yeah. So that's
in your report.
yeah, and that's in my report. But we have now got a diversity champion. Caroline has very graciously agreed to be our diversity champion. And it's a very good diversity champion because I know Caroline's interested in this, as sort of passionate about these matters to make sure that diversity is delivered properly. Okay, Caroline?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you, Pos. Thanks.
Okay, so definitely we can close that one off. Flu vaccination campaign.
I can help with that one, Pos, if that helps. From a matter arising point of view, the flu vaccination campaign is actually going really well, and we've had unprecedented levels of uptake, which is fantastic. But that isn't what the action's really about, but I had to get that in there. But really what it's about is it was an issue with regard to exemption certificates for mask wearing. It's all available on the gov.uk website, and the website is updated regularly with regard to the latest guidance, and there isn't a requirement for GPs to provide any certificates or exemption notification. Unfortunately, it's the patient's responsibility to actually access the website or get someone to help them to do it, to get those exemption certificates in place.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen. Michelle?
Yeah, I think what it wasn't putting the expectations onto the GPs. It was just, I think that at that time, the national guidance just wasn't very clear. And so patients were worried that they were having to get a certificate or a letter from the GP. But I think, they were just making sure that they didn't have to do that because they didn't think they had to. So it's just clearing up the confusion around it.
Okay, Jean, were you wanting to come in there?
Yeah, just by a slight extension, Chair, I thought it might be an opportunity to share a little bit of good news about flu vaccinations. From some of the weekly data that we got yesterday, I shared with colleagues that our local trust colleagues are definitely leading the way, our local acute colleagues leading the way in terms of vaccinating their staff. This is always a challenge because obviously we want them vaccinated so they don't become ill, but equally we don't want them catching it off anybody else. So just a bit of good news.
Good. We do need to hear as much good news as possible in the Tees Valley in relation to the flu vaccination, because my understanding is, and correct me if anybody's got any other figures, is that the Tees Valley is lagging slightly behind our other neighbouring areas. So we need to sort of encourage and push this as much as we possibly can. Janet?
I think it's fair to say that the North East region as a whole is actually doing much better than the England average, and that includes Tees Valley in that, so that is a positive. It is true, if you compare where Tees Valley are to some of the other CCGs within the North East and North Cumbria, we are at the lower end of the table, but if you compare that with where we have been in previous years, we are significantly ahead of where we have been previously. And the average for the over 65s in the CCG a couple of weeks ago was 72.7% from an over 65 point of view, and we've never been that high at that point in the campaign previously. And our uptake rates for the under 65 groups are significantly, many percentage points ahead of where we've been previously. We haven't got to the 75% target yet for all the at-risk groups, which is the national target, but that's an exceptionally stretching target. We're above the national average, and I think that's very good for where we are so far. But the flu campaigns are ongoing with additional supplies and stocks of vaccine from the Department of Health and Social Care Supply that will be available through November and into December.
Lovely. Thank you very much. All noted, and so I think we can close that action off. Thanks a lot. Learning disabilities and mortality review, Jean?
Yeah, Chair, that's me. Just to advise that on the back of requests, this was from Caroline at the last meeting, but also this is something that we're picking up and taking through the Quality Committee. I have a request out. It's still being worked through, so I can't give you the updates in terms of performance against that. But Mike Brealey, I don't believe, is with us, who's our Director for Mental Health and Learning Disabilities. He's also working very hard on this in conjunction with Karen Hawkins, our Director for Primary Care, in terms of supporting primary care colleagues, because this is a whole system approach to actually deliver and enable this for this vulnerable cohort. But I think the action remains on me because Caroline actually wanted updates in terms of performance against that. That is still outstanding. Janet, did you want to say anything?
Janet.
Yeah, sorry, I neglected to mention that our vaccination of patients with learning disability is again not at the 75% target, but is improving and much better than it has been in previous years. However, we are working in partnership with our TUBE colleagues who are working proactively to actually reach out to those patients within the LD community who find it very difficult to access traditional health services, and are working in partnership to actually vaccinate patients in their own home and with providers that know them well, working with the partnership, which I think should hopefully get us to a better place with the figures.
Okay, so shall we leave that action open for a sort of further update to governing body at the next meeting, I reckon?
You've got the option, Chair, of discharging it to the subcommittee, which is the Quality Committee, which is where we're taking it through, but
Okay.
I'm happy with your preference.
Okay, no, we'll assign it to that committee, but to be reported back as an exception to governing body if things aren't progressing as expected then. Okay, right. Governance and assurance report is completed. Action is completed. So we move on to the chair's report. So we've already touched on the fact that Caroline's agreed to be our diversity champion. Main item to note is obviously that we're in the second phase of the lockdown, and also particularly to note that primary care, general practice services are open and have been open all the way through all of the COVID situation that we've been experiencing, and also that secondary care and tertiary care and community services are working exceptionally well under challenging circumstances, and they're delivering as much as they possibly can as well of planned care as well, despite the pressures that we've all heard about in the public media. I'm not going to go through all of this because I'm sure you've read it, just to flag that we are about to progress to the election process for our elected healthcare professionals to fill our last remaining positions on the governing body for clinicians, and hopefully they'll be able to join us for our next governing body in January. Okay. Any questions on that? No, before we move on to the Chief Officer's report from Dave. Over to you, Dave.
Okay, thank you, Paz. And I think colleagues will realise I wrote this before the announcement was made this week about what Christmas means in terms of COVID for us all. So apologies for that. Just a couple of things to pick up from the report. I'm not going to go through it in any detail. Just a recognition of the continued hard work that everybody's making to make some progress in response to COVID. And I think just worth reflecting, and I guess for publicly, is the bit that we're trying to deal here with services for people with COVID, but just as importantly, trying to make sure that we maintain services as best we can for patients who have other conditions, because that's obviously one of the challenges and some of the learning from the first wave. I mentioned the flu campaign in there. It's good progress being made. There's a piece there about COVID-19 vaccinations, which seems to be changing by the day. But this does look as though this is being ramped up, and probably to reflect here in this meeting the fantastic response from our primary care networks who've really stepped up to the plate and offered the services to take forward the COVID vaccination. But I know as day goes by after day, we find out more about some of the vaccination for COVID, which changes the way the logistics might work. So I guess that's a bit of a moving feast, but I am impressed, and it's pleasing to see the way primary care colleagues have stepped up to the plate. Probably two bits of good news to lead the report, and the first one's the last paragraph there about the Gisborne redevelopment. I know colleagues around the table have been involved with this far longer than I have, but it's good news to see that actually they'll start work on that just before Christmas, which is well needed and will be a boost for people in Gisborne, but is a good sign of progress for the CCG and the local health economy moving on. And the last piece, very, very hot off the press, just checking the emails. If we cast our minds back to the previous CCG, so the 3 CCGs have now merged to become one in Tees Valley. We've just had the CCG ratings from NHS England Improvement. They've literally just been published this afternoon, I believe. Of the 3 previous CCGs, Darlington was rated last year for good, Hartlepool and Stockton were rated as good, and South Tees were rated as good. So that's a significant achievement, especially in the midst of going through a merger as well, everybody was. So I guess thanks from me, thanks from the governing body to everybody that was involved in that progress. It means that we move forward into this year as a single organisation, with the legacy being rated as good going forward. So just wanted to share that with people, very, very hot off the press.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. I want to echo Dave's feelings in relation to thanking everybody who helped to achieve good in the preceding 3 organisations that have put us on a good footing to start off as a Tees Valley CCG. So thank you very much. Any questions or comments from anybody? Yeah, Caroline?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Sue Greaves and another lady, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, last week pulled me into an assurance situation to join them in validating the surgeries that had put themselves forward in relation to the vaccinations, and that was they were really responsive, very professional. Janice was involved as well, so I just wanted to say that I was absolutely assured that that process was going as it should be. They were very quick to respond and they were excellent.
Yep. Okay, that's very good. Yep. Thank you, Caroline. Any other questions or comments before we move on? No. So we note the content of Dave's report. We note the preceding 3 CCGs ratings. We particularly note the hard work of all the people involved in putting those 3 CCGs into that position. And we note the work that's been done in relation to the COVID vaccination preparation and the process that was followed to approve the processes that are being proposed by the PCNs. Thank you very much. Moving on to Janet's verbal update in relation to localities.
Thanks, Paul. So at our last governing body, we'd just had practice engagement events in the few days before the meeting. We continue to engage with our practices. We do a weekly bulletin with them, and they have a Friday flu bulletin that will shortly be morphing into flu and COVID vaccination bulletin, and then they keep updating and appraising that. We have open door sessions. The primary care team hold them such that if there is anyone in a practice that has an issue or a question, there's a regular session that they're able to join to raise some of those questions and have them answered if they prefer to do it in that setting. Understandably, as you've already mentioned, practices are open. We've always been open and remain open, but obviously it's working in a very different way. And it's recognising that there are many positives that have come out of working differently, and we can reach patients in a different way. But that does give us challenges with the ability for, especially with regard to phone lines. I know there's been some concerns about the difficulty with patients accessing via phone when we're wanting to phone out to patients, and we've had some communications with the media and working to make sure that patients are aware of the numerous different routes that they could use to access their general practice. But appreciably, it is different. We are seeing patients in different ways, and that continues to be an ongoing sort of learning point as to how we can continue to improve how we do things and make sure that our patients are also aware of how they can access us in the way that works best for them. As we've mentioned already, yes, flu vaccination campaign is proceeding well. Especially have to mention the innovative approaches in Darlington with the drive-through approach, and obviously this puts us in good stead for all the learning with regard to COVID vaccination. And as Caroline's already mentioned, the response of our primary care networks has been really, really positive, with all wanting to play their part in the primary care end of the COVID vaccination programme. And that's recognising that at the moment, obviously, as we are in the second wave of COVID and we're all working very differently, there are significant pressures in practice, not only from the work that we are required to do in a different way, but also because of the impact of staff being either unwell themselves and off, or indeed members of staff having to self-isolate because of other affected family members. So significant pressures, but very heartened to see that the primary care networks were all wanting to, as the flu vaccination campaign would say, hashtag do your bit for the Tees Valley, which is good to see. And it's how we as a collective across the Tees Valley footprint all work together to play our own part in that really, really important campaign. One thing that I know we were keen to sort of find out about was what's out there on social media from an across the patch point of view. And the key messages that are out there at the moment appear to be around flu vaccinations. So yeah, that's obviously still a hot topic. COVID vaccination, as you'd expect. And obviously, yes, when nationally there are further comms around the coordination of the COVID vaccination campaign, because there is a very clear steer that we need to communicate following the national messages. Issues and concerns around fitness and mental health with regard to how you manage to do things differently amidst COVID. Need to mention the previously known as COVID virtual ward, which is now known as COVID Oximetry at Home. That's a programme that is initially a pilot in the Tees Valley, but is now being rolled out nationally to make sure that we can monitor our patients who are at most significant risk from COVID, i.e. the either older patients or patients who are younger with comorbidities, how we can monitor those with the use of pulse oximetry, which is a little clip that goes at the end of your finger to monitor your oxygen in your blood. And it's how we proactively make sure that that continues to take place across the Tees Valley and continue our initially very successful pilot. And understandably, one thing that has come out in the social media feedback is a concern about the reduction in the face-to-face contact that GPs have, or GPs or other practice member staff have with patients. As we've said, we are having to work differently in primary care. We are required to work differently under the standard operating procedure that NHS England has in place for practices. It's not that patients can't be seen face-to-face when they have a clinical need to do so, because of course they can, and we are doing, absolutely. But it is still to make sure that as part of what we do to keep our patients safe and avoid them having a contact that could increase their risk potentially of COVID, that we do deal with their issues remotely if we're able to do so. And that's the end of the verbal update, Paz.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Janet. Anybody have any questions or comments or observations for Janet? No. Okay. No. Okay. So we'll move on to Michelle's patient and public involvement update report. Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you to Julie Bailey and also the local health watch organisations across the Tees Valley for helping me to put this report together, because after 3 weeks in bed with COVID, it was a really, really quick turnaround to get the papers out. And thank you to Jane for your patience as well. So I'm not going to go through absolutely everything, but I'm really pleased that Jake Graham has now joined the team as our new Communication and Engagement Officer, which is fantastic for helping with the communication and engagement strategy, which will be supported by the North of England Commissioning Support as well. But it's just, you know, it's been a long time coming, so I'm going to be meeting with Jake soon so that we can start to look at that engagement with our patient groups and also the patients and carers and the public as well. So the community health ambassadors and the Darlington Community Council, they're still very active, but it's mainly being around information and signposting, and so it'll be great when Jake actually gets to meet both of those groups so that we can help to take the CCG engagement forward. There's the public campaign, so Do Your Bit, which has already been spoken about, advising people to contact the local pharmacy, the GP and the 11 online in the first instance. So that's, you know, been across the social media platforms and everything. And for the local health watch updates, I would say that many of them one of the main priorities is the information and signposting and making sure that people are getting the right information at the right time. So if there's any messages whatsoever from the CCG and other organisations, you know, please get in touch with the Healthwatch organisations as well, who'll be able to get it across their social media platforms. Many of them are continuing with the surveys and also their new way of working, which most of them are still working from home, which, you know, can bring its challenges as well. There's been in Stockton-on-Tees and also Darlington, there's been children and young people report mental health reports and also the impact of COVID. So those are on the are already on the website, so you'll be able to access those for further information. Accessing GP services is also another one. In Darlington, they've just launched a partnership with Healthwatch England and the Darlington Primary Care Network to specifically look at the digital exclusion, because we know that obviously with this new way of working that there's much of an emphasis for the online and telephone consultations, and other health watches have highlighted what those problems can be. So Healthwatch Darlington and the Primary Care Network are looking at people to share their stories on whether they've used it or not and the challenges that they may have faced, and in particular looking at people with disabilities, older people, and the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, especially if there's that language barrier as well. Also, just on the back of the children and young people, Healthwatch Darlington were also awarded a highly commended award at a national level for celebrating our volunteer team category at the Healthwatch Awards 2020. So that was just looking at raising awareness and improving the provision of information for young people. So they were really, really pleased to receive that, as were the young volunteers as well. I think maternity services has been, there's a few things that have been highlighted there, and also the again the digital challenges for some, including the affordability of devices and also the affordability of internet access. So, you know, not all of it is about not being able to use the internet, it's just the access to the internet as well. And there's also access to support and services, looking at physical examinations would have been more appropriate for some people rather than the video consultations, and also the impact on children with learning disabilities and their families. So they've gone without routine and communication and visits from social services. And I think in general it's just COVID fatigue. It's looking at the mental health and well-being of everyone. They're just, you know, getting very, very confused with the guidance and the different level, tier levels and lockdown and what that means. And so I really think that for the mental health and well-being and the social isolation of some people as well, that is also coming through from what the Healthwatch organisations are hearing. And that's about it, if anybody's got any questions.
Lovely, thank you, Michelle. And I'm very grateful that with the help of others, you did manage to pull together this report, because I really wasn't expecting that one for this governing body, but that's the reason why it was sent a little bit later than all the rest of the papers, folks. So apologies on our behalf for a late presentation, but I think it was a fantastic achievement to actually have delivered this. So thank you very much, Michelle. Any questions or observations from others on Michelle's paper? I think that Jean, yeah.
It looks like my video is working. Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Just on the back of Michelle's point in terms of mental health, we have worked with our colleagues in TUV extensively. I know that they are flexing services and also they're planning ahead. So there's the here and now around the mental health, and there's also impact on people who have existing concerns about their mental health, but also there are anticipatory needs around people who have hitherto not had problems. So in terms of flexing and readiness, our provider colleagues are thinking ahead to help meet that demand, and what that demand will look like, how it may materialise, and how it can be met. So I think your comments are it's good to see that coming through in the sense that the system's coming together around a common understanding of need. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jean. Anybody else? Karen? And then Mark Adams.
Thanks, Pos. Just picking up on a number of the comments that have been raised around access to GP services. Obviously, Janet's addressed a number of those when she was providing her locality update. But to provide some reassurance to the governing body, we are working with our comms team as well to make sure that we're able to get messages out to the public in relation to why they may have to wait a bit longer, the different ways of working for GPs, not only to support the public in their approach, but also to support our practices in terms of the constraints that they're working under at the moment. And obviously from a reception point of view and the reception staff that are dealing with individual complaints on a daily basis because of the change in approach and access. So we have developed some local comms that have now been put onto practice websites. We've also developed answer machine messages to support practices. We've also done that through our social media channels and our newspapers, local media, and we will be doing some video clips with GPs to explain to patients so they understand how they can access and that practices are still open, but you might have to wait a bit longer at the moment, and you might have to wait outside of the surgery at this time, and that's not only to protect the patients themselves, it's to protect those vulnerable patients that might be in the reception rooms, bearing in mind capacity is really limited within primary care in terms of space, and also to protect the staff that are there, because we need our workforce to still be there to deliver services to patients. So we are working on that, and we've been really well supported with our comms team and engaging with practice managers to make sure that the messages are right and that they're patient appropriate as well.
Can I just add to that, Karen? Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the patient groups and also the Health Watch organisations as well, when they actually speak to patients and carers, the patients and carers actually really do understand the pressure that GPs are under, and they really do understand everything, but they still have to say, well, you know, they have to give their experiences, but you know, it's a whole new way of working, and you know, people are just having to get used to it. It's as simple as that. And I think that that's why the digitally excluded project that's happening in Darlington will highlight possibly a better way forward in how we can support people to access GP services in a slightly different way. So I think it's all coming together. It's just, you know, at the moment it just feels as if there's lots and lots going on and getting nowhere, but we are eventually.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle and Karen. Yeah, both of you were addressing a point that's of relatively common concern to the public, so we've got to keep it in mind. And thanks for the background information that you provided, Karen, because it does help to assure us that we are doing what we can from a CCG perspective in relation to keeping the public informed. And it's handy that we've now got somebody pretty regularly from comms attending to hear our sort of level of discussion, so to make sure that we do get that message out to the public. And Michelle, your point in relation to the digital exclusion, it will be very useful to have some information available as to what we can do to mitigate people's issues when they have got a limitation to their ability to use digital information. Dave, did I see your hand up there for a second? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Paz, and thanks. That was a really helpful report. Lots of good stuff in there. I just want to come back to the digital exclusion bit, and I think Mark wants to come in as well. It's great the work they're doing in Darlington, but through Graham Earl, we've had some very, very early conversations with the Tees Valley Combined Authority, because digital exclusion won't just affect health, it won't just affect council, it affects the whole economy. So I think there's a really good piece of work that hopefully the Combined Authority can help us with, just to make sure that we get all of our clients, patients, citizens, however you want to describe them, so they've got the wherewithal, the access, and actually the understanding and the training so they can access these new services in a different way. So really, really important for all of us. And it's one of the things where we just need to join things up as best we can, really.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Apologies, Mark. I wanted to get everybody else's comments in first. Right, over to you.
That's okay. I've now got 2 points. I only had one, but now I've now got two. Just to link into what's been said about digital exclusion, and I'm sure this is happening anyway, but there's work in Middlesbrough with Ageing Better around training for older people to use digital technologies, so just to make sure that all that's linked up together. I completely agree with the point about it's broader than health. But the point I wanted to make was around what Michelle said around COVID fatigue. I think this is one of the critical and most difficult issues that we've got to try to bring communities with us on the response to COVID, and to alert you to there's some regional work being done on using behavioural insights to try to address COVID fatigue. So hopefully that can inform our local approach a little bit. I mean, unsurprisingly, the work that's been done, I think it was done in Gateshead, has indicated that most people are bored, fed up, frustrated, etc., with COVID. And I think that just, and with the changing rules and requirements, it makes it very difficult to land specific messages when people are bombarded by messages. So that's a really, really critical element of our approach to trying to protect people from COVID.
Sorry, before we move on, anybody else, any final comments or observations? No? Right, okay, well, thank you very much. Very useful in the report, and sparked a lot of discussion. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so moving on to Mark Pickering's finance report for the last 6 months. Mark.
Okay, thanks, Pos. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah,
yeah,
that's great.
So just as a reminder, the first 6 months of the year were part of a temporary financial regime, and this is the 6 months, or drawing that period to an end. The way that worked was that the CCG had an allocation but was able to apply for retrospective top-ups to that position. The position we see here includes retrospective top-ups for the first 5 months of that period, so April through to August. The September position and the September top-up hasn't yet been received. That's because the CCG is going through, well, I guess all the CCG claims, to be fair, are going through a detailed assurance process through NHS England. We're not alone in that. All CCGs and trusts are going through that, and that's taken a little more time than usual. So it's not of particular concern that we haven't received that, but it does need to feature in our report here. So the report shows currently that we have a claim of just over 7.4 million that's not yet been received by the CCG, and at the moment that features as a risk. There's no suggestion that it won't be reimbursed in the usual way, but it's just to flag that. The breakdown on page 42 in the slide shows where those variances are or where the additional money is being requested. Most of it, to be fair, linked to the discharge to assess process and getting patients out of hospital and into a safe place as quickly as possible, and recognising that the need really to move those patients through the system to prevent any backlog within the acute sector. In terms of other measures and indicators for the CCG, we are continuing to manage our cash position. The cash is within the targets as expected, and we have ensured cash flows speedily to our NHS providers in particular, given some of the pressures they're under with managing the COVID process. Although we're not formally measuring QIP this year in line with NHSC expectations, we are reporting on it in the pack, and we've got about a 60% forecast delivery against that, much of that linked to some of the prescribing work, but also estates and some of the technical areas around acute that we've been able to deliver. Our invoice payment continues on time. Delivery is usually around about 99%, which is excellent. And the final point, just to note on the statement of financial position, which is the balance sheet as we used to know it, there is a large prepayment amount that shows up on there, but that's because of the cash flow that we're making sure flows through to our acute providers. So not an area of concern, but does show unusually when you compare it to the year-end position. So in terms of month 6, we are showing a deficit of around 7.4 million, purely on the basis of an anticipated retrospective top-up, and we'd expect that to be notified by the end of this month, but as I say, may slip into early December because of the extra verification processes that are happening.
Okay, questions or comments from anybody? Must be some. So
One from David.
David Emerton, and then Karen.
Just really moving forward with the end of the Brexit transition period, are we expecting increased risk, particularly for cost of drugs moving forward?
So as part of our EU exit planning, the NHS is being encouraged, particularly for prescribing, not to change prescribing patterns. So in terms of additional volumes, that's not expected. There is uncertainty around price, but at this stage, that price uncertainty isn't reflected in our financial position. It's being managed and monitored at a national level. So when I come on to talk about our planning for the second half of the year shortly, I'll re-emphasise that point, that it's not in our local plans, but is considered at a national level.
Thank you.
Can I just pick up before we go to Karen? In relation to prescribing, we are showing some higher levels of prescribing. Is that COVID-based, or is there any worrying underlying tendency that we need to prepare for, say, for next year, of significantly higher background prescribing?
Janet, do you want to come in on that point?
If I can, pause, if that's okay.
Yeah.
There are some drugs that have actually been in very short supply and have been hard to get hold of, and then come back onto the market at highly inflated costs that have significant impact on the cost. And they're medications that you can't easily give a substitute because it involves a transition and a changeover. It may not be as effective. So you need to stick with a drug that the patient, is used to getting and works well for them. So it has significant cost implications. And there are already drugs that that are affected by that now, irrespective of any shortages that may or may not happen with regard to any link to Brexit. We are strongly recommending that we need patients to just order what they would be due to order on a monthly basis, their regular medication. If it's something they don't take regularly, not to order it just in case if they don't need it, because yes, we are making sure that these supply chains are intact, and that they will be able to access what they need when they need it, and not to order in advance and get bulk items. We were hoping to actually see at this point of the year that we would see a reduction in the volume of items prescribed secondary to the RPOS piece of work that was encouraging patients to order their medication in a different way and only order what they need. And we have seen some impact of that, but it is true, it gets disturbed by all the other elements that have played a role with regard to how people have had much higher costing drugs through no fault of the prescriber or indeed the person taking them. It just is what it is with the markets, as they sometimes are.
Okay, thank you. So that's effectively a national issue. It's not unique to us.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
National
okay,
issue.
fine. So it's not a particular sort of high risk to ask directly. Okay, moving on to Karen.
I think, Paz, that David jumped in and said it was really the risks and the allocations going forward, and how that was going to be dealt with. So it's been covered, thanks. I think Mark's going to cover the allocation.
Right. Anything else you want to flag, Mark? Anybody else want to ask?
No, nothing extra from me in terms of month 6. Thank you.
No. The one last question I had, sorry, in relation to these, was the sort of specific reserves in relation to primary care that was the budget to date was that we'd make some savings in relation to reserves in primary care, but that it hasn't materialized. Is that a COVID issue, or is that something separate?
I think it will be a timing issue in terms of the split between the first half of the year and the second half of the year. It's not an area that we flagged as a concern at this stage. No.
Right. Okay. But we'll sort of watch it for the future. So is this money that we'll definitely be receiving in sort of 3 to 4 months' time?
Can I pick that up as part of the month 7 to 12? Because I'll come back to
right. Okay.
that point if that's all right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Anything else? No. Okay. So moving on to the next section, Mark.
Okay, thank you. So we are in a position where we considered in committee a draft financial plan for the period months 7 to 12. That plan was submitted through to NHS England. It hasn't been formally approved yet, and therefore is still effectively in draft, but it does form part of our internal and external reporting as we move through October and into November. So the assurance process should be that we are using those formal budgets as part of our monitoring to identify any variances or any areas of concern. The sign-off process is expected towards the end of this month or perhaps into early December. At the time we considered the draft plan, there was delegated authority to make any minor changes to the presentation. One of those minor changes was in terms of anticipated income, and one of those anticipated income areas is to do with primary care. So we recognised that we were missing some primary care funding at that stage, and that's being confirmed. The total amount that we're anticipating, largely primary care, but also to do with some development funding, was around £2 million. So the plan effectively went in with a shortfall of 2 million. I'm pleased to say that up to today, or yesterday to be fair, we've received about 1.8, or confirmation of 1.8 million. So only a very small amount still outstanding. In terms of the plan, although it's not formally signed off, we are still using it, and we will use it as part of our financial monitoring, both through executive committee and through to governing body. So the next report we get will be utilising that plan. There are still some areas of service funding that are coming out bit by bit from the centre, and as you would expect, they have quite tight timescales to turn around. So we are monitoring those closely to make sure that our spend plans can take those through for what is now around 4 months of operational months between now and the end of the financial year. In terms of longer than that, there is a spending review today, so we'll see what news comes of that. There has been an announcement at the weekend around £3 billion of money next year, so we'll wait to see how that's to be deployed, but the early messages are that it's focused on mental health, both in terms of backlog and current services, backlog in terms of acute services, and looking at diagnostic capacity as well. So we'll wait for further detail on that over the coming months, weeks and months. But that's where we are in terms of months 7 to 12.
Just unmuting. Right. Okay. That clarifies matters. Thanks. Okay. Anybody else? Any questions or comments on that? So money coming in dribs and drabs as and when, effectively.
Yeah, a bit more certainty than we had in the period from months 1 to 6, but we do recognise that there are some central pots, I guess, of development funding where we haven't got all the clarity we need as yet.
I suppose, in fairness to central government, until you could see how COVID was going to play out in this part of the year, you couldn't really determine what you were going to need to provide for the latter part of the year.
Yeah, I think that's true. If you're operating it as one large budget, then you'd want to try and get some certainty or some better forecasting, perhaps, before you moved on. Yep. Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, so now moving on to the quality and safeguarding report. Jean.
Right, thank you very much, Chair. The report, colleagues have had it. I presume you've got the opportunity to read it. I'm happy to take any questions, but some quick things to bring to your attention. We have had the inaugural CCG Quality Committee. Colleagues will recall that the terms of reference and the need for this was signed off by governing body. Although this is a CCG Quality Committee and remains a subcommittee of the board, it is our intention to morph it to, over the next 12 months, wherever possible, an ICP approach to quality and quality assurance. So it remains a subcommittee of the governing body, but we are inviting, in the first instance, NHS provider, medical directors or directors of nursing, or chief executive appointed nominees. So we had the first meeting in November, which was chaired by Andy. And it was a good meeting. I think Andy was able to generate a genuine collaborative approach. I don't think there were any surprises at that meeting. However, it was good that everybody was cited on what we discussed. So moving forward in terms of that, we did have a discussion about the open serious incidents. and we shared everybody's numbers, which was quite innovative, and colleagues sort of welcomed the transparency of that, but also it engenders some appropriate challenging conversations about where are we and how do we address those. So the benefits of realising that, and of course I've then had some direct contact from provider colleagues to say, can we discuss this backlog? What do we do? How do we do it? I think over time what we'll be looking for is common themes that are challenges to all. So instead of each provider working on their own challenges, it will be building upon the success of others. So that's a really good thing to see. And you'll see from the papers that I've talked about TUV backlog again. And I'm happy to share that I'll be meeting with the medical director from TUV on Monday the 30th to look at how we do things differently. In the papers you've got, you will have noticed that CDDFT is now flagging as a mortality concern. I need to put this in context for governing body members who've been around, like Paz and Karen and Janet and Craig from a long time. Over the years, we have had mortality metric concerns. This does not necessarily translate to a mortality concern. It's about the metrics. And then when the metrics start to flag, what it means is you need to have a look to see what that means. And this is where we are at this point. So as appropriate, it's shared with you, but the Trust is working with NEQOS. You'll be familiar, NEQOS have worked with our other trusts over the years who've had challenges around these areas to understand what's flagging that concern and what needs to be done to address it. So it is an indicator, and it's an indicator of a requirement for further investigation. It is a metric that's flagging. You'll also see on there that for North Tees and Hartlepool, I've talked about concerns about the illicit use of non-prescribed medications on the site. The Director of Nursing did share this also with the Quality Committee. So we're looking at how we can support that, where is it coming from. Again, this is engendering this real ICP system collaborative approach to quality. So it's sharing, but then it's also sharing the burden as to how do we address this to keep our patients safe, whatever the issue is. I've talked about TUV and the backlog. I would like to bring colleagues' attention to the safeguarding metrics again. I have been flagging these for the last few meetings in particular. You'll see it is a major concern for the Tees Valley area, but predominantly on Tees. I've also put details in there in terms of our vacancies and the associated risks, which are currently flagged on the risk register. And just to let you know that we have a fundamental review of statutory requirements as well as our need across the localities that we serve and the partners that we work with. Colleagues may be cited on some of the recent high-profile media cases that have been flagged both on the BBC and in the Evening Gazette, which are some very, very sad cases, which although at a most concerning end of the scale, they do give indicator of some of the issues that we work with our partners with. And I think it's important that we stress that those challenges are children get the high profile, but actually the children and the adult cases are causing significant concern. And the metrics for Tees particularly are very concerning and going in the wrong direction. I think the benefits are we are cited on this, so we are informed when we're having those conversations. That's a whistle stop to Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, so David Emerton.
Thanks very much, Jean. I just wanted to ask a little, any progress on the situation with palliative care. It's mentioned, as we heard in the Quality Commission, that Butterwick isn't taking inpatients, and also in the papers otherwise there's reference to a vacancy for palliative care consultant at South Tees. And I think we were told that some review is being looked at to see how palliative care situation can be improved in Teesside. I just wonder if there's any sort of further progress in the area of capacity for the sickest patients who need palliative care in a hospice or failing out a hospital situation?
There's the things to share at a public governing body, David, are clearly Butterwick. The situation in relation to Butterwick is publicly available through their CQC inspection. The CCG does not actually commission from Butterwick. We support our hospices, all of them, because we do have a number across the Tees Valley through grants. However, in keeping with our approach and requirement to support quality, we have very much been supporting Butterwick because there is the adult perspective, there's the adult services and there's also the children's services. But we are mindful of the fact that the statutory regulator, the CQC, is taking regulatory action. So where our efforts have largely been at the moment is around about ensuring those patients who require those types of services are safely and promptly accommodated elsewhere. Hence, for example, the backlog at Teesside Hospice. What is also happening across the patch is Teesside Teesside Hospice were wanting to look wider in terms of a collaborative ICP approach around hospices. But what they're doing in the first instance is looking at themselves. What services do we provide? What services are needed? What services are needed for the populations we serve? But what they're doing as they're undertaking that work, they're engaging with acute colleagues as well to see how that is supported, how it can be supported, what is the model that is right, because we have in hospices, we have traditional models and we also have innovative models. And if we take an ICP approach to that, which we as the CCG are supportive of, we would look to support a variability in terms of service. That work is not yet at a sufficiently mature stage to actually share through the governing body. In terms of vacancies for palliative care consultants, you will be aware that these highly prized colleagues are in very, very short supply. So where there are vacancies, recruitment challenges remain.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Anybody else before I move on? No? Okay, so we receive and note, oh, sorry, Hassan.
I was under the impression a year or so ago that Teesside Hospital were looking to expand and build out behind where the old sort of where Cambridge Medical Centre is now. There was a lot of land that was knocked down that was apparently going to be for an expansion for Teesside Hospital. Does anybody know if that's still something that's in the pipeline?
Okay, Jean, briefly.
Hassan, I think it very much depends on your definition of expansion. I think it was an opportune time to acquire that land with a view to future flexibilities. What's happening a lot in that, and colleagues will know better than I do, particularly primary care colleagues, there is absolutely a time and a place for that almost you could call that acute period of at the very end of people's lives in terms of pain management, etc. But most of the hospice models, and I don't know if you want to come in, Janet, at all, but most of the hospice models are aiming around about supporting the patient and the family very much in their home context. So hospices are looking as to how they outreach in terms of those support. And if you do have those inpatient beds, do we need to have St. Teresa's, Teesside, Butterwick, Alice House as inpatient, and we also have Butterwick for children and Zoe's. So do we need all of those inpatient capacity, or do we need to look at a almost like a smorgasbord of hospice provision? Now, to work like that across the system takes an awful lot of analysis in terms of our need, and I think what I'm saying is currently Teesside are very much looking at how they do that. Butterwicks are very much challenged by their regulatory situation. Alice House, clearly they working very closely with their other colleagues because they do link together, and also St. Teresa's, but that work is not yet mature.
Okay, so work in progress, Jean, briefly, and then we'll move on.
Do you mean Janet?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Janet, apologies. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Do want to speak out of turn, sorry.
No. You're next to Jean on my little sort of...
Understandably, a patient's needs as they approach the end of life, or indeed in the end of life phase, can be wide and diverse. And across the CCG, we recognise that we need to move towards having equitable provision across the patch, that we do respond to the changing needs of families and those individuals that we are providing the care for. And that piece of work is ongoing to scope out, those areas of good practice at the moment, what you would choose to continue, what you would choose to do differently, and how you can provide that across the Tees Valley larger footprint. Lots of partners involved, as we've all raised now, with primary care itself providing a very vital part in end-of-life care. But it's making sure that we tie those elements together. I'll try and phrase it delicately. Understandably, around COVID, many patients have wanted to avoid going into hospital and have chosen to avoid that healthcare setting as a place of their preferred death and wanted to die at home. And it is how we are able to respond to that as a system to make sure that we can use this as an opportunity to consolidate and enhance and improve the access to equitable end-of-life care across all the Tees Valley. And that work's ongoing, and I'm sure it's something that will be able to be brought back to a future governing body when obviously plans have further progressed in that area.
I forgot Mike again. So thank you very much. So we note Jean's report, and we note the extra detail and discussion we've had about the need to equitably plan provision for hospice type care across the Tees Valley, and also other areas of provision for patients needing that care, but in a more community setting than, if necessary, an inpatient hospice bed. Right, thank you very much. Back to you, Jean, for the 4 sets of quality accounts.
Yes, thanks, Chair. This is down as a discussion item on the agenda, but it is, and I'm happy to take points, but it's largely for information. Our provider colleagues, each year they produce an annual quality account, which talks about their identified priorities, how they did against their priorities, any other areas by exception, things that they're going to focus on for the next year. As Commissioner of those services, we are required to provide what is called a third-party statement, and which says we've looked at, we agree is a fair representation, and we're supportive of what they're doing. In the past, we've brought these through in through governing body, either in their entirety or in dribs and drabs as they've come. Last year and this year, we've tried to bring them together as a composite suite of documents that relate to all of those. For the BD-eyed amongst you, you will notice that the NIAS one is missing. That has just been agreed this week. So with colleagues' kind consent, I'm happy to send that out as an addendum. I'll speak to Jackie in terms of the correct form of words that we would do that. But that has just been signed off this week. So you have a summary there of our statements in support of. What we have also done in keeping with our collaborative CCG approach, where one of us tends to lead on a certain provider, we've provided a composite response on behalf of a number of CCGs. Happy to take any comments, Chair, but it's largely for information, but if colleagues would like to discuss, I'm happy to pick up.
Okay, so my one comment is it's actually handy to have seen them all together, so you can sort of compare and contrast, and also that they do very much reflect the ongoing discussions we've had in the governing body in relation to the issues and the stuff that we're commissioning from each of those providers. So nothing really other than that from myself. Anything from anybody else? Raise your hands at the moment if you wish to speak or comment anymore.
And I think just to follow up on what you say, oh, sorry, Caroline.
No, I thought they were really informative pieces of work. I think the only thing that struck me was I wondered if you could, you know, put some of the stuff side by side so that they could share good practice. That was the only thing that struck me when I was reading through them. I was scrolling backwards and forwards quite a bit, but they were really informative, and I think give you an overview of what the situation is. So they were excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Just to answer that, Caroline, they are published documents. So the trusts do publish their quality accounts. So there is nothing to stop other colleagues equally having a look at that. What I was going to say, Chair, on the basis of our third-party statements is over the years, they've become increasingly focused and valuable. So in the beginning, we used to say, oh, that's very good. You know, everybody's worked very hard and we're really very pleased. But as an indicator of the maturity of the relationships that we have on the patch, we do make reference, as we have done in some of the areas where there's been particular or persistent challenges, some of which have been successfully resolved and some of which is still to be resolved. And again, it's that transparency which is an indicator we'd like to think of a maturing system. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so those are received. We've considered those and we received them, and we like the way that they've been clumped together at the same time, and look forward to getting the 2V ones.
It's the NIAS one. Sorry, did I say
the
two?
NIAS. Sorry,
NIAS
apologies.
one.
Yeah. 2V's are the last one. Yep, the NIAS one. Okay. Right, thank you very much. And now moving over to Craig, the CCG performance recovery update. Over to you.
Thanks, Pos. I was just going to give a very brief overview today of the LETS position in terms of performance and recovery. The presentation's in two parts, really. First bit around recovery, and then the second bit, the appendices, is the usual performance report. So just running through the recovery, it's very much based around our ICP position, and as we've previously discussed, that's grounded in the providers that sit within our ICP that we have the lead commissioning arrangements for, so predominantly North Tees and South Tees Foundation Trusts. We are actively engaged in supporting the recovery of CDDFT, recognising that we've got a strong patient flow there through Darlington, but management of that sits within the central ICP. So we are actively engaged, and we do continue to report performance in the performance section for all three trusts. That said, as Mark mentioned previously, back in September, we submitted operational plans and revised trajectories, both financial and activity. The activity trajectories were signed off, and what we've been doing over the preceding months is monitoring performance against those trajectories. As at September, beginning of October, both North Tees and South Tees were broadly in line with those plans, with some marginal overperformance, which is perceived as a good thing, supporting some of the catch-up in lost activity at the beginning of the year. But that was pre this second wave of COVID, and at the point in time, we were in line with forecasts and predictions around the R rate, which clearly has increased significantly since the beginning of October. So I think whilst we can take some assurance that we were delivering as we expected in September and October, the beginning of October, things have changed considerably since then, and that will be reported in future updates to the board as and when we receive the relevant information. I think in terms of some key highlights from a performance perspective, referral to treatment times and long waits, we picked up previously a governing body around the monitoring of long waits, and since previous discussions, we've implemented a series of weekly PTLs with our providers. So we've got a sound grip, a good understanding of every patient waiting on the waiting list over 52 weeks now. You can see from the latest position that we still have a considerable number of long waiters that trusts are trying to work through. There are a number of processes that have been in place to support patient safety and avoiding patient harm, including clinical prioritisation, clinical reviews, and harm reviews where patients have waited in excess of the expected timeframes. North Tees and Hartlepool Foundation Trust currently have a maximum wait of 68 weeks, with only 41 patients waiting over 52 weeks, which is a positive position. South Tees, it's considerably more patients waiting, and the bulk of our energies in terms of waiting time recovery is with South Tees at the moment. Both trusts are continuing to maximise the use of the independent sector to try and bring down long waits where possible, and prioritising the patients that are managed through independent sector capacity. We've also previously touched on cancer long waits. Those would be anybody waiting over 104 days. And we've worked with both providers to ensure that there's processes in place to identify potential long waits at 80 days and to ensure that treatment plans and management plans are in place and where possible bring forward treatment so that nobody else breaches the 104-day standard. And you can actually see that the numbers at South Tees has come down considerably, whilst North Tees and Hartlepool Trust have confirmed that long waiters that are still being managed at that trust. In terms of...
Sorry, Craig. Yeah. Craig, you just totally cut out for about half, 4 or 5 seconds there. Did everybody else get you? Did Craig cut out for others?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So just in terms of where I think I was up to then, was that around the cancer waits, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've worked with the 2 trusts to implement a process whereby at 80 days, a number of actions are taken to make sure that we've got forward management plans for all patients, and that where possible, we ensure nobody waits over the 104 days. So in essence, we've introduced a backstop. All the action that would have been taken at 104 days is now taken at 80 days to try and expedite any treatment that's required. You can see that we've actually been able to work with the trust to reduce the number of long waiters at South Tees, and everybody waiting over 104 days at North Tees now has a plan in place to get their treatment as early as possible. So moving on to the referrals, demand management and waiting list position, we've just tried to detail some of the key actions that have been taken. It's a continuation of work that was implemented during the first wave around trying to avoid unnecessary referrals, managing the demand that we've got and making better use of the capacity that's available to us. I wasn't going to dwell on that because there isn't a great deal that's different there, Pos. We've included a breakdown of the IS, the independent sector utilization. So what are we taking out to the independent sector? Split down by day case diagnostics, inpatients and outpatients. There are some variances from what we planned to do where we've swapped day cases for inpatients, but that's being done in light of the pressures that we're seeing in the acute trust and making sure that we're prioritising the right patients. So initially we put plans in place just to use the capacity. Those plans have been revised to make sure that those patients with the greatest clinical need are being seen in these facilities rather than just getting volumes through. So that's been seen as a positive thing. And we're continuing to work really closely with the providers, both NHS and independent sector, to make sure that they manage their waiting lists together in order to support making sure that the right patients are seen at the right time. Following on, we've got the performance report. I wasn't going to go through that in any real detail. We've talked through what some of the key issues are previously. You'll notice that from the summary, there's a few more greens on there now. So in terms of our particular targets being delivered, I think whilst that could be perceived as a positive, it should be seen with a caveat. Things like incomplete waiting lists. The waiting list is lower now in terms of the total number of patients on the waiting list. It is lower than it was at the start of the year, but that's probably because less patients are being referred through. We're not treating more patients. It's just that we aren't adding as many numbers of patients onto the list. So there's lots of work going on behind the scenes in terms of understanding what these metrics are telling us at the moment and how valid they currently are given the position that we're in. I was more than happy to take any questions, Chair, but that was it from me.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Any observations from folks? While people are thinking, I think it's probably worth flagging, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like we are now seeing a lot more cancer patients within 2 weeks. It seems to have gone up from a Q1 of 116, it's now 382. So there's a lot more, it seems to be a lot more throughput into cancer, which is kind of a degree of reassurance there.
I think reassurance in terms of the referrals are coming through. With an added pressure in terms of being able to manage those patients and making sure we've got the right diagnostic capacity, Pos. So that's where the challenge is at the moment, and just making sure that we don't then create a further pressure at the other end of the pathway when individuals require the treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's useful to note that the concerns that the system has generally in relation to referrals hitting acute care because they were being delayed by COVID is we are actually getting the numbers referred that need to be seen. Okay. Any questions? I've got one other question. Sorry, Craig.
I think Janet wanted to come in on the cancer point.
Sorry, sorry, Janet, I didn't see your hand.
It wasn't actually directly related to cancer. It was more of a general comment, if that's okay, Pos.
Yep.
It was with regard to, understandably, it does cause patients a significant amount of anxiety when their outpatient appointment or surgery is changed, deferred, cancelled, whichever words may be used at the time. And it is true, as from a primary care perspective, we don't necessarily know the next steps for the patient either, and it's just flagging the awareness that we are working with the trust to try and make sure that we do communicate as well as we are able to with our patients around changes to what they are expecting to happen. Understandably, yes, there are some elements that may be on all of our control and depend very much on other pressures within the system, but it is how we work as a system to help to make it as clear to patients as we can as to why things have had to change, but also importantly what they expect to be happening next, and if their condition deteriorates, be aware of what they do in response to that situation occurring.
Okay, thank you very much. So thanks, Craig. Performance noted, and we'll move on. Governance and assurance and risk report, over to Jackie.
Okay, thanks, Pos. Just to flag, Pos, I've now had to turn off the screen with all of the faces and hands, so I won't be able to tell you if somebody's got their hands up while I'm looking through my report.
Pay more attention.
So this is the regular report to the governing body. Again, like others, I won't go through it in great detail, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of areas. In terms of risk, the risk register and assurance framework have been fully reviewed since the previous report to the governing body, and we've now included an additional table which highlights the risks with an initial rating of 12+, and that's included at Appendix 1. So that's in addition to the previous reporting, and the intention of that is to allow the governing body to have a focus on those areas where there's an inherently high risk. So clearly if controls or assurances started to fail, there's the potential that it would drop back down. So that's partly in response to an informal recommendation by Audit 1. It wasn't part of an audit committee report as such in that level of detail. So hopefully that's of help to the governing body to be able to focus in on particular areas. At the time of writing, there was one additional new risk in relation to primary care sustainability, and that's included in the register. And I've highlighted at section 2 on page 114 the developing risks as well. You're aware of the M365 software upgrade, so there's a little bit of an update on where Mark is with that, with a trial being arranged with GP practices, so that we can get a little bit of learning on the types and the level of risk that we might need to include on the register. Data security and protection and cyber security is an area that is going to be considered by the Audit Committee at its upcoming meeting in December. And in addition, Mark and Graham Earl and Alison Emsley, who's the IT expert in Next, who looks after the cybersecurity framework, a meeting on Friday to look at that in a little bit more detail as well, just making sure that we're doing everything that we need to be doing. There is a potential of a primary care network maturity and recruitment risk that was highlighted for consideration at the November Executive Committee. And since the time of writing, there's a couple of other primary care risks that we've just been asked to consider as well. So you may see those coming through as they're further developed. And then finally, in terms of the clinical strategy, that's being worked across the whole of the ICP. Ali Wilson, who is taking the lead on the big area of that work, is working with the other partners to develop a project risk register, but inevitably we'll need, along with other partners in that, to include something on our individual risk register as well, just as a broad brush approach. Moving further down on the table about the objectives, you'll see that we do have a risk against each of our objectives. However, objective 3, in terms of research and evidence, we do only have one one risk against that. Now, I know there's an awful lot of work going on in terms of research and development, and that's picked up as part of the Quality Committee portfolio, but just to flag that, that's something that we might need to take a little bit of a further look at, and just make sure that we're not missing anything obvious. Then the final bit I wanted to add on that section was, since submitting this report, we've had our internal audit report. The final report has come through on governance and risk management controls that we have across the CCG, and I'm pleased to report that we've returned to substantial assurance on that, and there was only one very minor recommendation that was made, which was actually about cybersecurity, and it's something that we already had in hand anyway, but that's good news. And then in terms of finalising the report, to flag section 3 on page 116, which was about the EPRR deep dive into primary care, and I've highlighted there the work that Karen's team had done in terms of contacting each of the 80 practices and discussing their arrangements with them in terms of how they'd updated their business continuity plans and the assurances that we were able to provide to NHS England on that, and the work that they'll be taking further on with primary care networks in terms of supporting shared learning and learning from that. I didn't have anything else to particularly draw out of the report. It's all there for you, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, so anybody with any observations, questions in relation to the risk register? My reading of it was that the risks identified all made sense. The mitigations that were put in place and the processes to handle the risks made a lot of sense. What slightly made me sit up was the level of residual risk in relation to the CCG actually functioning and delivering its statutory needs. Was starting at 25 and then dropping down to 20, but just as a result of the level of impact of COVID, I suppose, basically.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is Jean's risk, but just as a little bit of background, obviously as a CCG, as an organisation, I think we've done as much as we possibly can for our staff. We've closed the building, but the building is COVID secure, and we've signed off on that. We've actually put tighter restrictions in than we are required to do. In terms of that, we've encouraged people to work from home and made sure that they're provided with all of the equipment that they need in order to be able to do that, as well as doing individual risk assessments, etc., etc. However, we can't influence what's happening outside their working life. So if people, people are able to get it, as we well know, which isn't related to what we're doing as a CCG. So the risk is still there. Jean had a hand up there. I'm guessing you were going to say the same, Jean.
Yeah, pretty much, Chair. I wouldn't dream of identifying high-profile national colleagues, but we're all aware of people who have been sort of explaining guidance chapter and verse and have followed said guidance and have still succumbed. So I think that is it's a pragmatic reflection of risk. We could say, as Jackie's clearly outlined, oh, we've done this and this and this, and it couldn't possibly happen. But what we're saying is we've done this, this and this, and we do still recognise it as a substantial risk. So that which we can control, we have and put in place, and very clear and consistent guidance and consistent refreshing of that guidance. But if somebody is unfortunate, then we do have to think about the consequences of that person being both unwell and also unable to work, and that's why the risk is as it is.
Absolutely. So thank you very much. Noted. And we've seen the impact of COVID on other organisations and the impact of COVID on delivering healthcare in the actual coalface as well. So yeah, I can totally understand why it's a significant risk to us. So in the absence of any other questions, we'll move on to your next one, Jackie. COVID-19 response and learning from waves 1 and 2.
Pause. This is the one where the names have been transformed.
Oh, of course. Yes, I'd forgotten about. Yes, yeah, it's Dave. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just struggling to get the mute button unpressed. So this is one of those papers where, you know, as soon as you write it, and to be fair, I haven't written this, Jackie's pulled it together with the help of the director team, that you're never going to quite do it justice, but nevertheless, it actually pulls together a kind of a story, if you like, for assurance purposes for governing body colleagues of the work that's been undertaken by the CCG, the context, how we've worked with partners, etc. So I'm not going to go through the detail of it. I'll probably just pick out some key parts, but then happy to take any questions, as will members of the director team, because really this is their report as well. So I think the key thing to pick up, which we keep on saying, but we probably can't say enough, is the fact that over the last few months, one of the key facets of COVID has been the learning from it, but also the fantastic partnership working across the NHS, but actually across Tees Valley in our case, and actually the part the public's played in part of that as well. So we need to reflect that and keep it in mind. Basically, the paper takes us through the fact that we've been in and then out and then we're back into level 4 in terms of the NHS national incident and what things that means, which essentially is we get into command and control. And a lot of this stuff were rehearsed in previous governing body meetings, but we just wanted to capture it all in one place. So as part of that command and control, the planning guidance was taken offline, if you like. As we've heard from Mark repeatedly, the financial regime has changed. It's a lot different to what it was before. And actually, some of the commissioning work that we do as CCGs has been kind of taken off our hands, and there's been national guidance on this is how you do it, that's how you do it, which is, to be fair, is absolutely right and proper in a national emergency. So CCGs, as the paper suggests, are category 2 responders in the parlance. That essentially means we're not in the thick of it, we're not hands-on, but we are expected to work very closely with partners, and I think the paper outlines some of the things that we've been doing internally and externally to fulfil that role, and particularly linking in for us with 2 of the local resilience forums. So we have the Cleveland one, which picks up the 4 Teesside authorities, but then also there's the Darlington one as well, and how at various levels we've actually played into that as part of emergency planning, both the initial first wave and now we're getting into the second wave. And we've been through a bit of there was the initial response, and then that subsided into recovery and some of the stuff that we hear from Craig's reports in terms of the planning and the performance. And now we're back into responding to wave 2, as we all know. So a lot of this shouldn't have been used to the governing body. But if I move on to page 168, there's a mix there of some internal arrangements and what we've done with the organisation. Jackie's touched on it there in terms of what we've done with headquarters, how we look to protect and support staff going through all of this, how we've dusted down business continuity plans and made sure we're playing up to those, we're doing what we need to do, and in fact how we've actually tightened some of the rules to make a safe working environment for staff, whether that's at home or in the rare occasion at the moment where people actually need to come into the office and use it. So there's some internal arrangements. We've stood up meetings. One of my reflections is, as a new member of the team, if you like, bizarrely one of the useful things about the way we've had to work is every day initially we were meeting with directors. So I think there's a group of directors, hope directors have got to know me and vice versa, probably more quickly than we would have done normally, which I hope is a good thing for people, but others will judge on that. There's a few smiles and laughs as I say that. So that's the internal stuff, but obviously we have a key role to play, and this is where there's loads of detail in the report in terms of system leadership, and I'm not going to go through any of the detail of this really, other than to highlight some of the areas where the team have had an immense effort and immense impact on primary care, all of the support that's gone in, all of the joys that we've all faced of constantly changing, sometimes by the hour, sometimes by the day guidance and what have you, that as a CCG we've had to play out, but then supporting practices to do that. The COVID virtual ward, which has been mentioned before, is a key part of that, but there's loads and loads more stuff there. And actually thanks to, in terms of partners, to the LMCs for their support in some of this as well, who've challenged and cajoled and whatever, but actually they've helped keep us straight, been very supportive when we've got into some of this, which is great. And a huge amount of work on infection control and prevention, and Jean's team's involvement in supporting and helping train a lot of it virtually, the 200 and odd care homes that we've got across Tees Valley. I always think that's a huge number, but we forget that actually we're quite a big geographical patch, so that's 5 local authorities, but it's a lot of care homes to support. Huge amounts of effort gone on with local resilience forums, with others around PPE, and all of the challenges that we all faced with PPE. And colleagues will be very familiar with some of the press and some of the media issues about PPE that we've had to deal with and get out to make sure that we've actually got a decent supply of the right PPE to the right people at the right time. And then in amongst that, some of the business as usual stuff, and Jean highlighted some of the safeguarding challenges that we've got. We've had to keep all of that on the go as well as we've been through this. And part of the balance that we've all faced, we've alluded to the FTs having to get the business as usual versus the emergency side of things. We've just had to balance up what is business as usual as critical, but equally some of the things that we've just had to put on the back burner or let go for the moment. We've had to redeploy staff to do various things. So there's a whole range of stuff in there, working with the children's services and the SEND inspections that are in there. So it's really to capture all of that for colleagues for assurance, but actually I think it just tells a good story of all of the things that have been done and how we've worked together. But cognizant of the fact that as we've gone into the second national lockdown, for a better phrase, the wave 2 stuff, we're getting into some of this again, but we just thought it was really important for governing body colleagues to see where we've been, some of the things that have taken place. There's masses more detail that we could put in there, so it's a long report, but we could put much more there. It was really just to capture that, and so people see what colleagues have been up to for the last few months. And for me, just to thank everybody for their input, their hard work, the collaboration, cooperation. I'll put in the end of that so far, because we're not out of the woods just yet. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, but we need to get towards that light, and there's quite a way to go. So that was a quick canter through a very detailed report. I hope it helps governing body understand where we've been and what we've been up to. And I suspect we'll probably need to do a second half report later in the year when we've having had our orange and we've got into the second half that we're into at the moment to see where we get to. But yeah, that's probably enough for me at the moment. Happy to take any questions, as I'm sure director colleagues will be.
Thanks, Dave. I thought it was a really good report. Sort of really summarised all the areas of action and the issues very nicely. One bit that particularly struck me was that the section on primary care, it really did assure us as a governing body in relation to all the actions that the CCG has taken or the primary care has taken with CCG support in order to deliver the care during this difficult time. And Michelle, if people query what primary care is doing, just lift that section out and tweak it. It's a really good summary as to what's being provided by primary care in this difficult time. Excellent. Anybody else? Any comments or observations? Caroline.
Yeah, I thought it was a brilliant report, the way that it did pull it all together. I think the only thing that struck me is if you do have to share it any further afield, is a bit of context around. Dave was new in post; he was brand new in post, and we'd just gone through a merger as well. So obviously, on the 1st of April, we became a new organisation, and so that meant that there was new people in post. At a senior leadership perspective, and also the governing body as well. So I think if you do have to share it further afield, I just think capturing that context, because you did all of this against the backdrop of that as well, which isn't insignificant by any stretch of the imagination. So I thought it really did set it out well, but I would include that bit as well, because that was really significant.
Pause, you're
Sorry,
on.
yeah, I'm on mute again. Yeah, Mark Adams, sorry.
Thanks, Pos. I just wanted to amplify what's in the report about system leadership and system engagement, really, because we've had great support as a local authority in public health within the local authority from the CCG, particularly through Dave and Craig and Janet and others, in terms of engaging with the hundreds and hundreds of different meetings that we have in both areas, but also being a really kind of willing partner. And well, I suppose in old days, it would have been a lot harder to get agreement on things that we've been able to just agree there and then and get on with, rather than going through the usual round the houses of is it my job, is it your job, who should be doing this? We've just kind of got on with stuff, and I think that's been really refreshing. So just like to record my thanks for everyone that's been involved in all pulling in the same direction. It's remarkable what we can achieve when we do that.
Oh, thanks, Mark. That's duly noted. Thanks. So, and Karen, was that a hand?
Yeah, it was just to pick up, Pos, on your point around the work that's been undertaken in primary care, and you asked around some celebration and good stuff earlier on in the meeting. What we will be doing is providing to governing body a report and the success of our PCNs and our primary care networks, because whilst all this has been happening in terms of COVID, we have had transformation and innovation happening within practices and within primary care networks, and that's been supported by the wider CCG team alongside of the clinical directors. So we'll be bringing a report to governing body in the future that celebrates success that's happened during the COVID pandemic and the transformation of our network.
That's great. It'll be useful to sort of almost like duplicate that paper to at least take to the two LMCs that we regularly liaise with, you know, in order to give them that positive feedback, because it would be very nice for primary care to get some positive vibes.
Yeah, it will be going everywhere.
Lovely.
It's going to be a real celebration, so we will be plastering it everywhere. But it is a celebration of the networks, but a celebration of the wider team within the CCG as well.
Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that report. It was very useful summary of the work to date, and I think your idea of a second half report would be excellent. Thanks, Dave. Okay. Next paper that we've got is effectively coming from the non-executive side of the governing body, in that they figured it would be useful to just get some sort of view and assurance as to what we're going to be needing to do from delivering services for the emerging group of long COVID patients. So it's got Michael Horton on it, but I think Mark Pickering, you're going to be speaking to this. Not too long, it's very quick.
Yes, just really, it's to pick up the fact that the guidance came out quite recently in terms of the post-COVID syndrome assessment clinic, and I focus on that assessment clinic because the purpose of this is about setting the specification for assessing those patients, because any ongoing requirements for those patients are absorbed within existing services in the main. It's not additional in terms of those ongoing requirements. It does set out what is expected to be included within those clinics, so physical, cognitive, psychological, and picks up the links to IAPT in terms of their input at an early stage, and also the chance to refer on to those following assessment. There is some ambitious dates in the guidance in terms of having those clinics, assessment clinics, in place by the end of November. You'll be aware we're approaching the end of November now. The CDDFT have been trying out some pilot areas. North Tees and South Tees are working on the scope of the services in terms of these assessment clinics. So work is ongoing, but it's fair to say that given the publication of the guidance, the dates were ambitious. So I think the reassurance is that the work is ongoing. It's due for implementation in line with the guidance, but the date of November, I think, whilst ambitious, is likely to be later than that, and will take us probably into the new year realistically by the time that they're set up. But yeah, I'll have a go at answering any questions, but I might ask colleagues to contribute to those too.
Well, one question that occurred to me, though, from the information provided, it was a little bit unclear as to who was going to be actually commissioning those clinics, because one bit it referred to NHS England, and in other bits it referred to CCGs. Is it going to be a mix of both, or is it going to be coming down fully delegated to CCGs to commission?
We're expecting to receive a funding flow to go towards this, so I'm expecting it will be CCG commissioned. We don't know exactly the amount of money yet, which, to be fair, isn't holding anything up, but that's my expectation.
Okay, David Emerton.
Yes, I actually sent Michael an email asking about children, as although most people will be for adults, I'm aware that certainly in the press, children are reported, and Michael said that would be looked into, as the numbers will be smaller, but requirements will be needed for children as well. So it'd be good to have a clear pathway for GPs to refer into. So we promise to take that forward.
Yeah, thanks, David. I noted Michael's response on that, so yes, you're right.
Janet?
I think it's also just worth noting that whilst obviously, Mark's had to flag that some of the timescales really were exceptionally tight and are not likely to be in place before the end of November. There are current support services that are set up to support individuals in their recovery and recuperation following COVID infection. And yes, we need to make sure that we do direct patients to the things that are available now for them. And just to stress that, not all patients will need to have an assessment that has an ongoing problem related to COVID, because yes, some patients will be able to access the self-help services that are available that may well meet their needs, and it's making sure that what we set up does enable those with the greatest needs to be met appropriately, absolutely, through the assessment processes and then we're referring on. But for those patients that can be helped by services that are available now and be helped to help themselves in their recovery, it's really, really important that we do that.
I don't know about the other clinicians, but I actually found the pathways that they'd set out in this documentation unusually clear for something that was developed so quickly by NHS England. So it's work in progress. It flags a need that's been increasingly highlighted by the clinical members of the non-exec side of the CCG, that they're seeing increasing numbers of patients. Obviously, as COVID rolls on, there's increasing numbers of people who have had the infection and potentially had long COVID symptoms lingering and troubling them afterwards. But there's now guidance. We're now cited on the guidance, and we're now cited on the fact that our exec side is now monitoring and planning for the delivery of what's being needed. Okay, thank you very much. Now for further COVID, position statement on CHC due to COVID-19. So I've got Diane for this, but who's picking that up?
Jane has tried to invite Diane into the meeting.
Right.
Yeah. But I haven't had a response yet, sorry.
Well, shall we just move on to the next section while we see if she manages to get in? So the reports from committee chairs. Anything to flag, folks, on the committee reports? Dave, Caroline, Andy?
No, it's as set out, Pos.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just for information. Right, okay. Items to note, the minutes received, minutes for any other business. We haven't got any more. So Caroline's iPad, questions from members of the public. Have you got any questions on what we've been discussing so far while we're waiting for Diane to try to get in? No, nothing there. Okay, so considerations of any impact on the risk register. I think actually, having had a pretty thorough discussion of the actual risk register earlier, I can't think of anything that we need to change or tweak in relation to the risk register. Has anybody else got anything that we need to add or change or alter? No. I'm desperately trying to fill in while we're trying to get Diane in. what should we do with this bit, Dave? Do you want to briefly talk to it, or we just receive it, or what do we do?
I can have a bash. I mean, it kind of describes the position.
Yeah.
Jean's got a hand up, Paz.
Jean has a hand up, all right.
And Mark.
Jean and Mark. Jean first,
yeah,
then Mark.
Jean and Mark. I was just going to say I've texted Diane to let her know she's on, but in the meantime I can fill rapidly, but I think Mark's probably closer to the detail than me. What the paper actually sets out is the sequence of events and the guidance that we had statutorily around CHC patients, those who would ordinarily be CHC patients, those who may be CHC patients, subject to assessments, etc. And it talks about how we've implemented that guidance, always maintaining the patient at the centre of everything that we were doing, both in terms of their safety and appropriateness of package around them, but also any considerations for family and carers. And I think the paper goes on to give you metrics around about numbers of patients, patient cohorts, and therefore an indication of the finances. That's an extremely brief summary. Right. So over to you, Mark, for a bit more detail.
Thank you, Jean.
2 points I was going to raise.
Mark, you're very quiet.
All right. 2 points I was going to raise. No, slightly better.
No, still very quiet.
That's funny because it was working just fine.
Yeah, it was great.
So 2 points I wanted to raise.
No, it got louder, and then when you moved it by your mouth, it became very quiet.
So how is that? Is that better?
Yeah, it your voice a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 2 points I wanted to raise. One was the finances, as Jean's mentioned. When the scheme first came in terms of discharge to assess and try and get people out of hospital quickly under phase 1, there was uncertainty around whether the funding would be capped or not. It wasn't capped, and indeed has formed part of our retrospective allocations in months 1 to 6 that I mentioned in the finance report. The positive news, I think it's positive, is that neither has it been capped for the period from months 7 to 12, so we'll still have access to those additional funds as required. The other point I wanted to make was that this paper, or a very close version of it, will be coming to Audit Committee. So just in terms of any concern for governing body in terms of scrutiny or awareness, we've got capacity within Audit and Assurance Committee to review this paper as well.
Okay, so we note the finance probably coming. Is that correct?
The finances will be drawn down by us based on our expenditure in this area.
Right.
So whilst we work our way through the assessment process for not only those people that are being due for CHC now, but also the backlog of patients from phase 1, we will work through those as quickly as possible, but in the meantime, draw down the funding to support their costs.
Okay, right, okay. Plus, the fact that the paper basically states what the situation is and how we have delivered the service to date. Dave?
Yeah, I think it's probably just worth recognising the scale of the challenge with the backlog that's being created, but actually the team are working really hard and are there or thereabouts on track with delivering the trajectory that we agreed with NHSE.
Okay. Any other questions or observations from anybody before we receive the position statement and Mark Adams having to head off, right? Okay, right, so we received that position statement and last opportunity for any other business before we close off the meeting. Only half an hour late, apologies, but this is me chairing. Okay, no any other business, so thank you very much everybody, and see you at the next meeting in January.